So, hello everybody, here's your Niall Sebastian Sieger. In this video I want to speak a little bit about a sad experience I had to make in the past years. I'm a man who's informing about universal communication, for those of you which do not know me, and I produced a lot of video data where creatures which have lived as human beings before but which have lost their human bodies, so ghosts also, if you want it like that, have presented themselves in the video documentations, and they did communicate, and a lot of these video documentations were for their living family members, and they did invite the living family members to send questions, test questions, so a test which should have been created by the living family members, and they were invited to send that to me, so that these creatures which have lived as human beings before, these ghosts, them have the opportunity to identify themselves as best as possible towards their living family members, for their living family members. So in a lot of these video documentations are published in the past, where ghosts have presented themselves and communicated to the public, but also to their living family members. I also communicated to the living family members that I would like to see that they send me a test, so that I then can test the creatures I'm in contact with, and that they can prove their identity for their living family members. So my very sad experience is that the living family members, in the most of the cases, nearly all of the cases, did not react to that specific request. And that is for me very sad, because in that way they did ignore their own ancestors, or at least the creatures which have lived as human beings before, which they tried to reach them. They have ignored me totally. And I also cannot understand it, because how won't they be able to identify ghosts or creatures which have lived as human beings before and belong to their own families if they do not react, if they receive such video documentations where ghosts do communicate and do present themselves, and where they receive videos where such stuff is requested, their own action to create such tests to identify the creatures which do not have a human body anymore, and to send the test to me, the human who is able to communicate with these creatures and who did produce these documentations, to help these creatures which have lived as human beings before to reach their living family members, but to also help the living family members that they can identify them best as possible. And they were also invited to come to face-to-face meetings, if you want it like that, here in Bonn, where they would have been able to communicate with these creatures, and they did not so. So I want to make clear that I'm very sad that my life experience there is sad, because the living humans which received such video materials, the living families, did not react to that. There was a specific need, a specific request, and they did not react to that. That's a fact. And for me, as a living human who's trying to help creatures which have lived as human beings before, I came to the conclusion that I can't stop to produce such documentations with creatures which have lived as human beings before, which want to reach their living family members. Because the living family members, in the most of the cases, do not react. And for me, it is very stressful to produce such video documentations, to do the communication, to explain it to the people, to film it, to make it transparent and all that stuff. That's a lot of lifetime. It's very stressful, and it's very sad to not see the right reaction. It feels for me like I just wasted my lifetime. Also, the families which did not react did let their own ancestors down by not reacting. That's something I totally cannot understand. I totally cannot understand that, and it's very sad. A very sad lifetime experience. I mean, in the past years where I tried that. I just wanted to, I'm gonna upload this video, I just wanted to produce that video to make that very clear. If you ever come in contact with somebody who's maybe able to communicate with your ancestors, and he gives you the opportunity to create a test to identify these creatures for yourself with questions, and you do not react to that, think about that before you maybe come into the situation, because that leads to a situation which is totally demotivating for the guy or the woman who's maybe helping you, and it leads to a situation where you failed to ensure that the creature which have lived as a human being before and maybe presented him or herself in such video documentations is the creature with the correct identification. Because it is not simple to identify creatures which do not have a human body anymore. It is just not that simple. The next thing I want to speak about is that some people, and I'm talking about now my experience in the internet, if I go to Facebook groups, for example, I read the comments there often or sometimes, and I think a lot of people which do not have the lifetime experience by themselves to communicate with creatures which have lived as human beings and ghosts, but which are interested and have some knowledge in the topic. A lot of these people are misguided. For example, I had contact with a woman in the internet, and she wrote to me. See, the situation was, I did ask her, what about if I would have contact with one of your ancestors? I think it was her father. I'm not sure about that. I think it was her father or her grandfather, something like that. So I did type something and wrote something like, would you send such tests? And she wrote back, well, if you can tell me how my father or grandfather called me when I was young, I'm sure that is my father or grandfather. No, that is wrong. Because if any other creature which have lived as a human being before do also have the information, you have to calculate that maybe another ghost gonna identify him or herself as your grandfather or father. Because ghosts or creatures which have lived as human beings before, if they communicate with living humans, they also lie sometimes. They're not always telling the truth. So it is a total fail to react like that and to not spend some effort and some energy by yourself to create such identification tests. I cannot understand why living humans often so ignorant, even towards their own ancestors. For me, what I had to witness in the past years, that living families do not react if they have the option to come into a situation to communicate with their own ancestors, and they have been unable to do so before. I cannot understand why they do not use their chances. I cannot understand why they often let their own ancestors down in a way that they do not react. And all these things I cannot understand. And for me, as somebody who did try to help living families there, who did try to help creatures there to reach out for their living families which have lived as human beings before, that is totally sad and totally unacceptable. That's how I look at it. Of course, these are the decisions of these living families, but I wanted to make the point clear in case you, who's watching the video, did receive such video documentations from me, where maybe one of your ancestors have presented himself or herself. So a ghost. In the future, therefore, I will not produce so much documentations anymore with creatures which have lived as human beings before, which want to reach out for their living family members, because that was a fail. I'm not willing to spend so much energy, so much lifetime, so much energy, as I said, in situations where I have to film that, where I have to do the universal communication, where I and the ghosts then request specific support from the living families, if the percentage is so high where they do not react, so high as I had to witness it in the past. So living humans have to understand, they have to understand, if people like me are willing to help them, and if you belong to one of these families, if somebody is requesting something like that, where you then benefit from, like if you belong to one of these families, if you sit down and create such tests and then you receive the answers, you can ensure that the ghost belongs to your family or the creature which have lived as human being before. And me, as someone who did invite a lot of living families to receive such support from me, and who produced a lot of video material with different creatures which have lived as human beings before and which belong to different families, what I have seen is totally sad. And I'm not willing to help people any further because it was such a big fail. Not a small fail, it was a very big fail from all the living families which have received such invitations. That's how I look at it. It was a big fail if they really want to communicate with their ancestors. And because they did not react specific and correct in the right way, I think I came to the conclusion that maybe the people are not interested in to receive such help. And because it do cost me so much time, so much energy, and so on to produce such documentations, in the future I will tell the creators which have lived as human beings before, which want to reach out for their living family members, that the fail percentage, if I produce such video data, is too high. Too high as that I would be willing to produce further videos like that. Hopefully you can understand that, and that's very sad. Totally sad. But that wasn't my decision. But I have the sad experience, and so I have to decide, with all the sad experience, that it doesn't make sense to keep going like I did in the past with creatures which have lived as human beings before, which were trying to reach their living families like that, by producing video documentations, by inviting them to send test questions to identify them better, by inviting them for direct face-to-face meetings here in Bonn with me, where them also these creatures would have presented themselves and would have tried to communicate with their living family members. After somebody like me did help them to understand the communication methods these creatures can use, which do not have a human body anymore. So it's very sad, but my efforts and my try to inform about ancestors communication and to help that living families come into the position that they are then able to communicate with their own family members, these family members which have lived as human beings before and have lost their human body. So my tries there were a total fail. And I only can come to the conclusion that living humans do not want to have such support. So, thank you for watching. You're now Sebastian Power-Sieger. That was the video regarding identification. And I want to add something to that. Living family members have to understand as well, regarding me and the data I've published in the past. For me, it is more comfortable if living family members do test the creatures I'm in contact with and which do not have a human body anymore by themselves, them creating a situation where they not reacting to such specific needs. If I identify creatures which have lived as human beings before and which I not have met before, I also have to communicate with other creatures which have lived as human beings before, which then try to check their identification to ensure, yes, that's the creature like he ID himself or herself. So the creatures which have no body anymore. So other creatures have to work the whole time to do that job, to identify those ghosts, because the living family members do not do that by themselves, and that's also unacceptable. Think about that as well. Thank you very much for watching. You're Niall Sebastian Power-Sieger, and that video was regarding identification of ghosts and the total failure of living families to react to specific requests.